Hello and welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. This one into the Aries full moon or hunter moon, which occurs on the 9th or the 10th of October 2022. As ever, I'm going to just sketch out to you how I'm going to approach the video, but please stay with me because at the end of that I will give you an appraisal of each of the 12 zodiac signs for the following 2 weeks, which you can watch in terms of your sun or your ascendant. The choice is yours. So first of all, I'll share exactly when this event is occurring in the major cities of the world. Secondly, I'm going to share with you what I believe an Aries full moon is about, just in a more general context, how we can all relate to this event. I'm then going to share with you what the specific interaction of the various planets are on this particular Aries full moon, because we have got some very potent stuff going on. And I'm going to do that by sharing the event chart wheel based on Universal Central Time, and that shows an ascendant in the sign of Cancer, very much about our feelings, but also our sense of security. And then I'm going to share a simple birth chart wheel that we can all relate to collectively to get a feel for what this will be, especially from an international viewpoint, I've got to be honest. And finally, I will go through each of those 12 zodiac signs. Now, before I go into the full analysis, just like to remind you, if you'd like to get your year 2023 personal forecast based on your time, date and place of birth, if you order it now, you'll get the rest of 2022 free. Plus, in my special package, my roadmap, my life roadmap, the character analysis, which can guide you for the rest of your life, highlighting opportunities, but also perhaps some of the patterns that have been repeated in your life, which you can learn to grow beyond with the knowledge this report can give you. And in this special package, you can get 30% off. So please see the link below. Also, if you're new to my channel, thank you so much for joining me. If you'd be so kind to subscribe, that would be fab. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. If you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for all your ongoing support. So on the screen now, you can see exactly where this event is going to occur in all the major cities of the world. Now, Libra is where the sun is located. It's very much to do with how we relate, but it's also about finding balance, making sure the different elements of our lives are in alignment. Now, of course, the sign of Libra is a cardinal sign, very much about action, making things happen. So we're in that part of the year when, if we can relate more skillfully, improve our ability to listen, which in itself is an art form, then that's something that can be such an opportunity. But with the moon in Aries, the moon in Aries is much more impulsive. It's much more about our immediate feelings as an individual rather than thinking so much about how we relate to others. So in other words, the moon and the sun are in conflict. But what makes this particular event so interesting is that the ruler of the sign of Libra is very close to the sun and therefore in an opposition with the moon. But generally speaking, the Aries full moon just pushes back a little bit on the concept of reaching out and finding that equilibrium. It's reminding us that in so doing, we mustn't lose our personal identity. So the moon in Aries can be good in that regard, because we can bend over backwards to be people pleasers, but if in so doing we forget about our own needs, then clearly that's not such a smart thing to do. So over the next couple of weeks, if there is some relationships in your situation where you feel that you don't quite get back what you give out, this can be a time to just draw back a little bit, develop some new strategies, Perhaps in some more serious cases, think if certain people are really good for you in the longer term. So on the screen now is the event chart wheel based on Universal Central Time. Now I like Universal Central Time, not because I live in the United Kingdom, but because it's something that we can all relate to. But other astrologers may produce their charts on this event based on where they live beyond Greenwich. So this gives an ascendant of 4 degrees 25 in the sign of Cancer, very much to do with nurture, security and protection. Can also be to do with defensiveness as well. So that's a theme for this event over the next couple of weeks. But then if we highlight the position of the Sun in Libra, very close to the ruler of the sign of Libra, Venus, just about 3 degrees apart, they're in the 5th house, which is very Leonian. It's very demonstrative, playful, warm and affectionate. And that's meaning that this particular event, in terms of the Aries full moon alone, I think does have the potential to draw us together. It reminds us really to focus on the things that we share rather than highlighting the things that make us different. The moon in Aries, as I've explained already, is very much about I, the individual. But in fact, in terms of this chart, it's in the 11th house, the collective. So if you are wrapped up in an all-consuming love affair, I think this event is telling you to take a little bit of a breath, make sure that you're not neglecting your friends, and, try to reinvigorate your social situation. If you're looking for a relationship, or you'd like an important relationship to come into your life, I think Venus can certainly give your moves some real imagination and flair, and also quite a lot of charisma. So if you are meeting someone over the next couple of weeks, could be really interesting. Now, one of the key elements or the key factors in this particular event is that Saturn, the planet of structure, is actually forging a very constructive link to the Sun. You can see that Saturn's at 18 degrees, the Sun's at 16. But if you look to the left of the chart, Mars, also in an air sign of Gemini, is at 22 degrees. So what we have is not exact, but it is a grand air trine, a collaboration between the thrust of Mars, the structure of Saturn, and the innate relating energy of the Sun in the sign of Libra. So that gives us an opportunity to use that air element to articulate our feelings. It's just that Mars is in the 12th house, which is very complex. Mars in Gemini is quick moving, thrusting. You may have found yourself being more active since Mars moved into Gemini, or having a greater sense of inquisitiveness in terms of finding out information. But whilst Mars forges a great link with the Sun and also Saturn, it actually forges 2 or 3 really challenging links with other positions. First up, it's in a square with Neptune in the 10th house. Neptune in the 10th house points towards the potential for a sense of disorientation that could be affecting many of us. Also, because Mars in the 12th house can be about hidden enemies and also anger, it's also the case that Mars and Neptune can create a sense of distortion. Now, this is particularly true because Mars in Gemini can be about communication, particularly everyday communication. And that obviously can be very much to do with social media, microblogging sites, and of course, more standard media, newspapers and TV. So I think there is the potential for some distorted messages to be distributed even more than they have already over the next couple of weeks. But perhaps more challenging is that Mars is in a quincunx with Pluto. And Pluto on this event chart is in the 8th house, which is a very deep, very, very deep location for Pluto to be. These 2 planets, of course, are the rulers of Scorpio, Mars traditional and Pluto the modern higher octave ruler of that sign. But Pluto in the 8th house very much in keeping with its Scorpionic energy. And I think that that particular aspect is concerning about weaponry. And it's also concerning, I think, too, about the level of war crimes that are going to be uncovered, particularly in the Ukraine. So unfortunately, that is not a very pleasant influence at all. And of course, there has been talk of chemical weapons and tactical nuclear weapons and so on, and that is a worrying aspect. But also Mars is in a quincunx with Mercury, the ruler of the sign of Gemini, and that's in the 4th house. Mercury in the 4th house, although it's in its other home zone of Virgo, the 4th house is that need for security, but Mercury in the 4th house isn't so good because Mercury thrives on clarity, whether through its rulership of Gemini or through its positionary needs in Virgo. So I think there again, Mars in the 12th house is seeing energies come into the surface, angers that's been suppressed for a long time. And although Saturn is in that constructive link with Mars and the Sun, Saturn, you can see, is in the 9th house. The 9th house is very much to do with civil liberties, international affairs, the rule of law, and we've got restriction there because Saturn's there. It's in the sign of the collective Aquarius, but it's in retrograde, but that's in an exact square with Uranus in the sign of Taurus. And that's evoking a lot of dissatisfaction around land, the grab of land that obviously the Russian Federation has tried to undertake. We've obviously got China has been talking about attacking Taiwan. These are very troubling times. And I think that square between Saturn and Uranus creates a lot of tension. Now, if you recall, year 2021 was dominated by Saturn square Uranus. There were 3 exact squares. The last was on the 24th of December. We've had this aspect developing again since the 2nd of October, and it's going to go on within 1 minute until the 12th of October. So they don't become absolutely exact this year like they did in 2021. But with Uranus in the 11th house is people. It's the population. So where we see unfair taxation, or we see people in positions of influence abusing their power by bending rules to enrich themselves or to avoid responsibility, it's going on all around the world. It's not acceptable. But we also see the beginnings of Pluto's instincts of the sign of Aquarius, which of course is going to happen briefly next year in 23 and will become much more fully entrenched from January the 21st, 24. And that is being shown by Amsterdam City Council. And they're saying that if properties are left unoccupied there, people will be taxed on that. And also potentially Amsterdam City Council saying that they will insist that they will be rented out and they will set the rate. That kind of interventionism is where the power of Pluto can be used in a productive way. But I think what we're seeing at the moment is the end of Pluto's journey through Capricorn, which began in 2008. And because the Scorpio energy can be very much to do with hidden power, machinations behind the scenes that we don't necessarily see, very much to do with lust, to do with power, to do with money. I think Mars in the 12th house is pushing more and more discontent to the surface. And some of the perpetrators of this unfairness, these fiddles, these dodges, this outright larceny and mafia-like behaviour that's been going on at a state level by many leading figures around the world, there's going to be a pushback against it. So the Libran energy is wanting the fairness. The Aries energy is finding a voice, but it also asks us not to give our power away in our personal relationships and make sure that we do get that good pivot between being interested and invested in our relationships, but also setting our boundaries. So this event gives us an opportunity to do that. But with Saturn square Uranus, I think there's societal tensions. Mars quincunx Pluto is very troubling. We're going to see more really deeply dark stuff coming into the open. But we do have in our everyday lives an opportunity to be more playful, interactive, listen better, support each other better, because a change is coming. It's just not quite there, and we're seeing the destruction of some of the worst influences to come from Pluto's journey through Capricorn. And it's not just that Pluto in Capricorn is all bad, because it isn't. Every zodiac sign and every planet going through a zodiac sign has an upside or a downside, just like every person has the best side of themselves and the worst. But I think this quincunx between Mars and Pluto is challenging. The Saturn square with Uranus is challenging, and we just need to know that with Mars in that square with Neptune as well, that what we're being told, and I'm not talking about, you know, the good old BBC that might just follow what they're told, so they're not themselves necessarily distorting, but maybe more just passing on the information that's pumped out. But if you're more discriminating in the type of information that you consume, just be aware that distortion can be a real issue. And particularly, I should say, because Jupiter and Mercury are actually in an opposition on this event. It's just a dissociate opposition. What is it? It's about 4 degrees, because Jupiter's just under 2 degrees in the sign of Aries, and you can see that Mercury is late in Virgo. So that's very much about the dissemination of ideas and ideologies, that particular aspect, which has been going on for some time. So we just need to be aware there is a battle for the moral high ground, but some of the people trying to have the moral authority are not being moral at all. It's just based on sheer fear, threat, guns, violence, and that's dark stuff. And then we've got people who want a more democratic and fairly balanced economy where there's a greater distribution. It's not just based on the people in power getting what they want. So I think this event is really evoking in us a greater consciousness of where we're all at. Now on the screen now, this is the simple birth chart wheel, which just shows us that Uranus is in house 2, money, land, food shortages, in terms of food growing, but also distribution. And Saturn is in house 11, the collective. And of course, the Sun and Venus are in house 7, very much about relating. And Venus, I beg your pardon, and the Moon in house 1, very much about us as individuals. And Pluto's in house 10, actually forging a very positive angle with Mercury, believe it or not, which is great for trying to push back on the distortion of Mars in its square with Neptune, because it's asking us to get with the clarity, do our research to really be more discriminating. So that actually can be positive. Pluto in house 10, very much about that old power, those orthodoxies, those big corporations or big state. It's very much about protecting interests. It's not really very much to do with everyday citizens. So that gives you a flavour of this event in terms of the natal chart, but also the simple chart that we can all relate to. Now please stay with me for your 2-week forecast for each of the 12 zodiac signs. So Aries, the interesting thing about this event is that it actually gives you a real opportunity to get your relationships onto a sounder footing, but it won't necessarily be all on your terms. And the other thing to remember is that some of the information you hear that could guide your responses and therefore see you triggered in some ways may not actually be based on fact. So you could hear something, say through a third party, that shapes your opinion on a particular relationship matter, but not in a necessarily positive way. And that could be because someone's got an agenda, or perhaps their own view of a situation is in some way swayed by some kind of subconscious bias. So, you know, despite the fact that it couldn't push you to look at any relationship which is not quite working as well as you would like, because that's totally understandable, a 7th house full moon, but obviously the moon is in your sign. Just don't jump to any quick conclusions, because with your ruler Mars compromised by Neptune in your 12th house, that alone can create a lot of misunderstandings. Mars is also compromised by its angle with Mercury, the planet of communication, which could see you pick up on one particular detail and then sort of react to it quickly. And of course, Mars is also in that very challenging aspect with Pluto. So if pride gets into the equation, that also can be an issue. So I think for all of us collectively, this particular full moon is trying to push us to get the best out of our relationships. But for you, I think it is not jumping to conclusions. If you can find some kind of diplomatic path and get things to a place where both of you perhaps move a bit, if it's not been quite as you want, that will be a real win. On the other hand, if you're single, I think this can give you a lot of desire to actually bring a satisfactory relationship into your life, and you could enjoy some fortune in that regard, because the solar eclipse, which occurs later this month, is also strongly influenced by Venus, but that's going to be in your 8th house, very deep and passionate. So the next 6 months is going to be interesting for your relationships for sure. Now Taurus, for you, this event is very much about trying to find a balance between the spiritual, psychological and emotional dimension, which is where the moon is, with the practical plane, where the sun and your ruler Venus are, the 6th house. Now of course, because Mars is in your 2nd house and in such a tense relationship with Neptune, with Pluto and also with Mercury, that's something you need to be conscious of, that perhaps worry over money or the foundations in your world, or whether your physical needs are going to be met, could actually accentuate any kind of health issue, whether it is, you know, from a physical viewpoint, or just feeling weary or run down, or feeling that life seems a bit overwhelming. These are all very important factors. So what I would say is that generally you have a real appreciation of stability, and we are going through a time when all of us are becoming much more conscious that costs are going up, interest rates are rising, fuel security is obviously being threatened, and it's a very tender time. But just make sure that you're thinking about your qualities in terms of any immediate challenges that you are facing, because your qualities are very, very strong. You can be the most steadfast member of the zodiac. So even if things seem like you're up against it at the moment, particularly with Uranus in your sign in that square with Saturn, so it feels that your professional opportunities are limited or loaded with pressure, almost like the 10 of Wands cards in tarot. If it feels like that, you feel a bit overburdened with it all, just bear in mind of your unique ability to work through situations in a solid way. So fall back on those core characteristics which are so strong for you, and don't let fear, as much as you can, influence your reactions and your actions. And know that the solar eclipse, which is coming later this month, is one of the most amazing solar eclipses for relationship matters that you will have experienced for many a moon. So please make sure you join me for that forecast in a couple of weeks. Now Gemini, for you, everybody wants a piece of you. You're just so popular. Nothing new there. Of course, because you are so mercurial, you have this ability to flex and pivot and get on with so many different types of people. That's amazing. But when it comes to your professional situation, perhaps there is a danger at the moment that you are being scattered. Mars is asking you to focus on what's really important to you, the individual, But because Neptune is applying its energies to the position of Mars, and Mars is actually, I should say, going to come into an even stronger square with Neptune, which of course they are under square broadly within 3 degrees all through October and November, and that's repeated in March next year, and that can drain you a little bit. So if you're unclear about your place in life in general, however popular you are, or however many things you're trying to do, however many people that you're relating to, it can get dissipated. And your ruler Mercury is also in that tense quincunx with Mars in your sign. So Mercury for you, being in that location, is asking you to think about how things feel. Uranus, of course, in the 12th house along with the node, asking you to think about how things feel. But Saturn, in its tense right angle with both those positions, is kind of emphasizing where you feel you have limitations, where your options are not quite as plentiful as you would like. So I would say in a social context, this is actually a pretty strong couple of weeks that you could be in for. But when it comes to your professional or financial situation, or about where you live or how you live there, there can still be a degree of uncertainty, or some quick moves and then you change your mind and flex and go in a different direction. So I think that this is a time to enjoy the good opportunities that are there, but I think you need to be selective around your time management. So Cancer, home is where the heart is. And with Venus so close to the Sun, your appreciation of your immediate environment is really going to be heightened at this time, particularly with the moon in Aries, because that means that your feelings are going to be closer to the surface. But you're someone who doesn't necessarily always like to reveal exactly your responses to situations. There's a protectiveness about you. And with this event, based on Universal Central Time, with the ascendant in Cancer, that's very important for you over the next couple of weeks. So I feel there could be a professional situation, or where you work, if it's not feeling as comfortable or the environment doesn't suit you as much, you're going to be particularly alerted to that over the next couple of weeks. But also this event could see you thinking about how you could work from home if that's something you haven't done before. I mean, obviously through COVID, a lot of people have worked from home, but if that didn't include you, I think this event could see you thinking about that, or offering a service in your immediate locality. But generally for Cancerian people, I think your passion and your need to get your home as solid and as pleasing aesthetically or practically as possible is definitely going to be strong. But of course for you, Mars is in the 12th house, both in terms of this event technically, but in terms of your solar horoscope, and that is arousing a lot of old material from the past. And the square with Neptune means that your emotions, if you are thinking about home, family, nurture, there is a lot that could come up. A lot of sensitive material could be moving. You may need to be around people at the moment who are quite kindly, or just can communicate with you almost in a non-verbal way. They just can sense where you're coming from. I think that's quite key for you at the present time. Also Pluto in your 7th house, in that quincunx with Mars in the 12th. If there is some deep politics embedded in your history that's to do with relationships, and perhaps the way you approached it or the way someone else approached it wasn't optimum, there could be a lot of reckoning around those past interactions at this present time. Now Leo, for you, having the combination of the Sun and Venus in your 3rd house means that your natural, very charismatic way of expressing yourself could be emphasized furthermore. Also, we've got Mercury in that opposition with Jupiter, so a desire to travel, to expand your horizons. The moon in the 9th house could make you a little bit restless. But I think there's going to be a lot of talking, a lot of social interaction, which can actually be very pleasant. What can be less pleasant, I think, could be a professional relationship. If you're not really feeling very fulfilled or satisfied, or basically your job is just dull, I think that can be quite an issue with this particular full moon. You're needing something that's giving you a greater sense of verification, of validation about what your skill set and personality holds, and what the impact that has, or what you exchange, particularly with Mars in your 11th house, coming into conflict with Pluto in the 6th house, which for some years now has seen you having to make quite a few sacrifices. But now I think it's reaching the point where you're needing to be more yourself. You're needing to get that part of your nature which is fiery, which is regal. You're needing to get your talents and qualities more out there. And if there's somebody, you know, on an everyday basis, or a partner that's inhibiting your desire to be a bit more of a free spirit, that's what this event is going to be making you more mindful of in the next couple of weeks. This brings us to Virgo. So for you, the Sun and Venus are in the 2nd house. Now, Venus on the Sun in this way is really exciting financially. I hope that there has been, despite the headwinds we're all facing, a few pieces of good news around your income or the marshalling of your resources recently. But if things are still a little bit not as you wish, the combination of the 2nd and the 8th houses in opposition are asking you to get even more in touch with how you can make some economies, squeeze a bit more out of the resources you've got, be a bit more pragmatic. Now, it's a rare thing for an astrologer to be telling a Virgo to be pragmatic, but Venus on the Sun could be giving you a bit of an indulgent streak at the present time. We know the sign of Libra is very much about relating, but it's also about aesthetics. So it can be about, you know, the sign of Taurus can be about fashion, but I think the sign of Venus is very much, a sign of Libra is very much about presentation. It's more to do with the superficial side of things. So whether it's in terms of, you know, the type of food you're digesting, the 2nd house, so that even though this is a Libran full, or Libran influence full moon, it's an Aries full moon, the 8th house, in a way it really speaks to the Taurus energy of the rulership of Venus. So if there are some ways in which you can be a bit smarter about your budget, I would take them. Also, with Mars in your 10th house, that's giving you a desire for greater recognition. But that square with Neptune in the 7th house means that if there's someone around you who sort of damns you with faint praise, that's probably not doing much for your morale. Also, Saturn in the 6th house is making you painfully aware of your responsibilities, and Uranus in the 9th, painfully aware of your need for a change or to break out and do what you want. So I think the reality of your financial situation and the politics around it may mean that at the moment you may want to give yourself a few treats, to be honest, to try to deal with the sort of harsh reality that we're all facing up to at the moment. But where possible, if you can balance things a bit more around the ins and outgoings in terms of your everyday finance and everyday sense of self-worth against the longer term plans you have, that's going to be important to do. So Libra, what does this full moon represent for you? Well, I think it could be some pushback if someone feels that you've been too focused on your individual strands and the things that are important to you, and someone may seem to flag that that is an issue with them. But I think, as we've discussed many times in recent months and years, the role of Pluto has been so immensely important for Libran people. And generally, the sign of the balance is about reaching into others, often being the peacekeeper, the mediator, trying to find that point of agreement. And in many cases, you know, that quality, that inherent quality in your nature has not necessarily been appreciated. I think what makes this event really lovely in some ways is that your ruler is so close to the sun. So that's going to help to just navigate any slight dips there might be in some key relationships, as long as it's not too serious. Of course, in a bigger sense, Mars in the 9th house is giving you a desire to have your voice, to travel more, to be a bit more flexible in your approach. It is clashing with Pluto, so all that effort you've put in around home, emotion, family in recent years, I think Mars is kind of saying, well, look, I've done as much as I can. If some people, I'm just never going to please them. So Mars is almost seeing you rather rebellious. Also in its square with Neptune, you've bent over backwards to help others through Neptune being the 6th house. What more can you do? The issue, I think, perhaps is that Mercury is in the 12th. So if there are some niggles or some things that are not being spoken about, they can be amplified in the quincunx with Mars. But generally speaking, you know, having Jupiter in your opposite sign is no bad thing. So I think relationship matters can be overcome for the most part, unless it's a serious matter. So this chart over the next couple of weeks, I think really is saying, look, I feel that you've learned so much, you know, that you've given so much to others. You're probably just wanting other people to step forwards and meet you a bit more, really, still. So even though essentially this can be asking you to become more aware, I think it's other people that need to give you more yet. That's what I feel is the underlying theme here. So Scorpio, well, I'm going to tell you that the solar eclipse, which is coming towards the end of this month, is giantly important. So this is a bit of a prep for that, because that's going to be influenced by Venus as well. But it is, the Sun and Venus are in your 12th house. So is there some concerns around some relationships? Is there a lack of trust? Is there a feeling that you can't rely on key people? Is there a sense that people are not necessarily being upfront with you? It could be in a professional or work situation that you're experiencing this. With your two rulers also clashing, Pluto's pushing you to say, to express your ideas, but Mars in the 8th house means that if you do express how you feel, it could be volcanic. You know, it could really suddenly come out from nowhere. So I feel that you could be quite sensitive at the present time. Mars in that square with Uranus in your 7th house of relating. Psychologically, this is a tender couple of weeks for you. Venus being so close to the Sun suggests to try to see the best in people, but also try to divine who's not really being very sincere. Which brings us to Sagittarius. For you, this, you know, has a lot of upsides, because you've got the moon in the same sign as your ruler, Jupiter, which is for you the 5th house, and the Sun and Venus are in the 11th house. You know, you could be spoilt for choice. Everybody wants a little piece of you. That's a nice situation to be in, Sagittarius. Because Mars is in your 7th house, I think if you are single, that's giving you a bit more thrust and a bit more desire to get the kind of relationship you want. Obviously Venus on in its home zone of Libra, very close to the Sun, is suggesting that maybe someone in your friendship circle or someone you meet for a shared interest could show up as being interesting to you over the next couple of weeks. With Mars in that quincunx with Pluto, if there are any deep niggles around money in relationship matters, it could get quite tasty. And with Saturn in your sector of everyday expression in a tense right angle with Uranus again, stress can be a problem for you over the next couple of weeks. So whether it's about business relationships, personal relationships, familial relationships, I think what you're looking for at the moment is a bit of respect with Mars on your 7th house, but you can't demand respect, you have to earn it. But I think generally this is quite a sweet full moon as they go. It's just all the other peripheral influences that are around that are more complex. Neptune squaring Mars, for example, confusion around a home or emotional relationship. So I think The generosity of spirit that Venus on the Sun can bring suggests that all of us need to try to see the best in one another. If you can give your social life a bit of a boost at the moment, I would. But I think there is the potential still for a little bit of tension and stress. So if you're working too hard, do some play. If you're playing too hard, be a little bit more structured and self-disciplined. Capricorn, so for you, Aries in your 4th house, home, family, emotion. But the Sun and Venus in the 10th house have been offering you opportunities to make progress professionally recently, particularly if your job involves relating to people or as some kind of a representative or perhaps a customer service point. Real great opportunities have been developing recently for you in that regard. But how does it feel? How does your work feel? What's really important to you at the moment? But over the next couple of weeks is a lot to do with that question. How do things feel? So whatever element of your situation, or whatever strand I should say of your situation, whether it is to do with your work, your play, your relationship, your interests, or your home life, it's how does it feel? That's what this particular full moon is asking you to think about very carefully indeed. Now obviously with Saturn in a right angle with Uranus and the headwinds we're all facing in terms of finances, there may be a growing consciousness of the need to perhaps rethink your work in some way, particularly if money is a key motivating factor. We all need to have it. Then perhaps some of your options seem a bit limited, but be guided by that principle. How does it feel? Not just by the more status-led side of things, you know, the title of your job or the respect that it may garner. These are nice things to have, but the most important thing about anything in life is our relationship with ourselves, and that is what this particular event is asking you to really focus upon over the next couple of weeks. Now Aquarius, having the moon in your 3rd house, along with Jupiter, is very bubbly. The 3rd house is very Gemini-like, it's quick-witted, and obviously Mars being in your 5th house is very self-expressive, absolutely lovely. But Mars in a square with Neptune isn't great for risk taking when it comes to resources. So if you are having dialogue or thoughts about more speculative use of money, proceed with great caution. Now Mars is obviously in that tense quincunx with Pluto. Is there somebody, if you're single, that you really find very, very tempting, very alluring indeed? Because psychologically it may be very difficult to resist getting in contact with them over the next couple of weeks, to be really honest with you. Now because Mercury is in the 8th house of your situation, in actually a very good angle to Pluto in the 12th. If there is something you need to research very carefully at the moment, you've got a great chance to do so over the next couple of weeks, and that can feed into the conversations you're having. So your belief systems are underlined by the moon in the 3rd house, but your higher values are what's being spotlighted by the Sun's combination with Venus. If you do travel over the next couple of weeks, you could encounter someone or visit a place that you find is very enriching to your senses, but you could also find, even if in a very diplomatic way, someone pushes back on how you express yourself. Also Saturn in that very tense right angle with Uranus. If you do feel limited around your home life, or your levels of stress are a little bit higher at the moment, it wouldn't be a surprise. What I can tell you is that by December, the square between Saturn and Uranus really starts to dissipate, and for the first time in a couple of years, some of that high levels of cortisol and adrenal release, which I've experienced as well, can hopefully start to ease away for many water bearers. Which brings us to Pisces. Always last but never least. Now, of course, your ruling planets are Neptune and Jupiter. And Jupiter's in the same location as the moon, the second house. That's about everyday money, but it's also about your self-worth. The 8th house, where the Sun and Venus are, is very much to do with your future financial situation. Do you know, you could have a surprising event over the next couple of weeks. Maybe some money or a rebate or some twist that you're not expecting. I'm not saying your costs aren't going to go up, because everybody's is going up, but within the mix something could happen which you find pleasantly surprising. Of course, Neptune is in that square with Mars, so any desire to change where you live needs to be extremely well thought through. Also, with Saturn in the square with Uranus, your nervous system still can be, you know, stressed out by being around people that drain you, want a lot from you. You can be one of the most self-sacrificing people of all. It's important that you maintain your boundaries at this time, Pisces. So finances, a surprise upturn. I'm not saying not increase costs as well. Look after the nervous system, and when it comes to anything to do with a property matter, proceed with a degree of caution and do your research where you possibly can. Mercury's angle with Pluto suggests that one friend can actually be a real ace in the pack for you. Give you some very clear, very objective and very sound advice if you're open to receiving it. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. All the best for this Aries full moon, and goodbye for now.